So Quddus, you and I were talking about process mapping,
Yeah.
which sounds quite prosaic to me. But you were, reminding me of the value of it, of actually getting it done. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think we both brought it up. It's a question that is there, and I'm glad that it's becoming more of a conversation. I really hope that it's becoming more of a conversation. Process mapping is, I think, the bare bones of understanding what it is that your business actually does. It's not about invading people's space or understanding, like spying or surveillance. It's about understanding what are the moving parts of your business. So if you have a machine and in one end comes mince and the other end comes out a sausage, there's something that's going on inside that it's doing that, right? And I think because of and this is what I've learned from you, because of the sort of tribal, almost like traditional nature of handing expertise and knowledge down by hand, by mouth over time, through experience, through understudy, through being immersed in that environment and just figuring it out. That could be lost, that could really be lost inside of a firm in terms of, well, what is it? How are the levers actually moving, and how is this, the proverbial sausage, how is it being made? And add to that every single partner and perhaps every single department may have its own version of doing that, right? So if you were ever to replace any of your processes or automate them, the first rule is always going to be, well, we need to know exactly what it is that is happening at each point in time, so that we can make decisions about which part is easier to automate, which part will be more efficient, which one affects the bottom line more, all those questions, which one, and importantly, which one is better for the client, right? This idea of client-centric service, but my thinking.
I mean, it's interesting to sit here. I had this conversation, you and I have had similar conversations with Partha Nag of SBA, who sits on one side of this process piece in the back end of it,
or the front end in terms of implementation.
Well, and the front end, you're absolutely right. It reminded me of, these are not new conversations in this industry, but it's still, in my view, a big gap in a lot of work areas that it feels like taking the time to sit down and just map your process it is a really healthy thing, because I think maybe people read lots of stuff into it. If somebody says, right, we're going to map your process, at that point, you mentioned sausage machines.
Yeah.
That is a very contentious feeling. If you're a team doing a type of work that is high status and is complex and high value, people read process as meaning mundane, process-based, low value, commoditization, job losses. Whereas I know from practical experience, if you have the time in any organization with any process, just taking the time to map it, you will learn something useful and valuable.
100%. And I think in terms of doing it, like if I'm being asked to do it, or go through that process, which it is almost always step one anyway with any engagement, if I'm going to approach a law firm, is it doesn't have to be one-on-one. I mean, it's going to be a combination. We can get a team together and do it together. We can whiteboard it together. We can obviously whiteboard it remotely. Those facilities are all there and by design. But look, it's not something like, it's not an interrogation. I can understand, perhaps, maybe, are you suggesting, if I'm trying to follow, you suggesting that some people are protective of how they make the sausage?
I think there's all sorts of layers in this. So I think if the question is, I wonder if perhaps if law firms see the value in mapping their mapping their processes, particularly their legal ones. I think if you go to a team to do that, the implications from it are quite big. I think if you sat with a team and said, we're going to process map you, I think the fantasies that people will come up with will be about, oh, why are we doing this? Is it that they're going to, we're going to stop reducing jobs?
Oh, right. Okay.
So I
Yeah.
think it generates a sort of fantasy world in some people's minds,
Right. In terms of
which
like
maybe
reading
is
into
why,
it too much.
yeah, because everyone's human and
Right.
everyone, nothing's nothing, everything's something.
Mm.
But if you were, I mean, that's one side. If you were to take, say, how would you approach the process of mapping take a legal work type? How would you approach that task?
So I mean, I've always used the phrase "from client to completion," right? It's
Mm.
just it's a little cool phrase to use, but it makes sense. From the point
Mm-hmm.
where the client is engaged, um, and there are things that happen before that even, but we're really looking at someone needs some work done, right? So a client will engage. You'll have your interview. Typically, you'll have an
Mm.
intake. You'll have some things you'll have to cover by ethical obligations and regulatory obligations. You'll cover them, and there's different ways to do that. Definitely more comfortable and efficient ways of doing that
Mm.
for the client. But then, yeah, then who does it get handed to? Who takes the notes on that? Where does it get stored? Who does it get sent off to? Are you still dealing paper in people's offices? I mean, not that you can't, right? But let's say if we're going
No.
to automate, digitization is a given that needs to happen.
Yeah. But if you're
Speaking,
just looking at your process to get a sense of, these processes have evolved over time. So if you just want to look at it so you can get a grip on what does actually happen from woe
yeah,
to go,
yeah.
go to woe,
Yeah,
other way around.
and there's never an assumption that that's the only way. Of course, it's colored and flavored every day. It looks different, even though it's the same
Yeah.
task. So it's understanding how many, let's say if it's like a decision tree, how many times does it split, and how many places could it split into? And you follow that to the point where, let's say you bill or you get or you actually receive the money, right? And that's probably the end of it, right? And you look at that, and there's a lot there in terms of without technology that could be done to make things easier and simpler.
Yeah.
But with technology now, groups of steps that are happening could be put together, made easier to work with, value add through technology in terms of, let's say, doing the searches for you or making the copies for you, or all of those things, or uploading it and backing it up for you. You don't need to, manually look at it, or scanning things like, legal AI, or sort of legal AI, sort of the being able to apply machine learning to a contract to see which clauses look like other clauses. The tech exists, right? So all of these things can be done. And importantly, and I was having this conversation earlier today with someone else, we need to recognize, so this is a message to both the clients, potential people who want to go through this process, but also legal tech, that everyone's flavor of this, what they do when they clock in and go to work, is unique to them. So the stack that you may use will not be the same for every company, and therefore that's why you need that. That's why it's hard to have that conversation if you are a consultant or a vendor or someone who's coming and trying to sell one particular or a small group of products that you're affiliated with, because the tech
You
is
need to
not
be able to
mature
take the
enough.
helicopter view
Yeah.
and step away. I mean, you said it to me earlier when we were talking before this, to step away from the tech and look to the function. Let's look what we're trying to do and then think about the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Is it something you'd advise people would take the time to do in these COVID lockdown times?
Oh, that's a good one. I think,
Okay.
yeah, Why not? You know,
Yeah, come on.
of course.
Well, you know, I know it's. I think that's called a Dorothy Dixer.
Yeah, I think the point that I would make in response to that, of course, yes, but really, I think it's more sort of a statement in the sense that if you're not doing this now, it's going to be very difficult for you to successfully transition into a more efficient process or better. I mean, call it efficient, call it better bottom line, call it more quality of life for your workforce, call it better balance, you know, call it whatever you want. But all of these things are results of that process, and that being the step one of that transformation process, right? Actually understanding what it is you're doing. I would say though that that's a very practical thing we're exploring right now, right? Process mapping, being very practical. I think there are steps before that, and I think that's what we sort of touched on a bit as well before we started the recording, about the fact that there's an education, and I always harp on about this, but there's always an education piece to this. You know, people need to be open to the idea, need to have the curiosity for it, but also, you know, perhaps a picture needs to be painted for them to start that conversation, from which point they can go, okay, this is what the end might look like. This is what the end can look like. This is an example of what the end looks like in another industry, you know, and then the end of this journey, let me be clear, not end as in like the end of times, but you know, the end of this particular rabbit hole that we're going down. So that is a parallel thing that happens, you know, whether it happens before or at the same time. And it's a constant process of building capacity in the existing leaders and the existing workforce to recognize that where we might be heading, vision, strategy, all those sorts of things.
That's great. Okay, I think we will leave it there. Thank you, Quddus.
Cool. Thanks.